All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're completely unpacking the epic, tragic, and honestly, deeply misunderstood character of Paul Atreides from the Dune universe. Whether you're super familiar with the sweeping sands of Arrakis or you're completely new to this incredible world, we are going to look closely at how a young, noble heir transforms into literally the most influential and controversial figure in the galaxy. We're treating this as a true character study, pulling apart the lore, the prophecies, and the harsh realities of his journey.
So here's a massive question for you. Is Paul the ultimate sci-fi hero, or is he actually the villain? Because Paul's story aggressively challenges everything we expect from the traditional chosen one trope. At first glance, his narrative seems to perfectly mirror that classic hero's journey. You've got a young prince thrust into an unfamiliar world who survives a great tragedy to rise up and save an indigenous people. But his status as the chosen one is actually his fatal flaw. It's the very thing that traps him.
Frank Herbert literally spelled it out for us with his quote, "Beware of heroes." He deliberately wrote Paul's journey not as some triumphant victory lap, but as a dire warning. He really believes society has this dangerous tendency to just hand over every decision-making capacity to charismatic leaders. Paul Atreides was created to show us the horrifying cost of absolute power and the real danger of placing all our faith in a single savior. The manufactured Messiah, a hero born from a breeding program. Let's start at the beginning, on the ocean planet of Caladan. Okay, so even before any of the wild, supernatural stuff kicks in, Paul is already an absolute force of nature. I mean, think about who trained him. He was shaped by the absolute best minds in the galaxy. His mother, Lady Jessica, teaches him the secretive Bene Gesserit martial arts and this intense Prana Bindun nerve control. Then you've got Thufir Hawat training his mind and mentat computational thinking, which essentially turns him into a human supercomputer. Throw in legendary warriors like Gurney Halleck and Duncan Idaho for elite combat. He's the ultimate product of aristocratic privilege and highly lethal education. But he is carrying a much, much heavier secret burden. You see, for centuries, the Bene Gesserit sisterhood has been running a deeply secretive genetic breeding program. Their goal? To produce a male superbeing called the Kwisatz Haderach. Lady Jessica was actually ordered to bear a daughter for this program, but out of love for Paul's father, Duke Leto, she completely defied the sisterhood and had a son. That single act of rebellion makes Paul the potential Kwisatz Haderach, generations ahead of their careful schedule, and that just throws the entire galaxy's political landscape into utter turmoil. Betrayal and the desert, the crucible of Arrakis. Everything changes when they leave their home. It is honestly astonishing how fast things fall apart for him. He goes from being a privileged duke's heir to a hunted refugee in a flash. The Emperor, who's feeling totally threatened by House Atreides, colludes with their mortal enemies, the Harkonnens. Their trusted doctor disables their shields, allowing this devastating surprise attack. With his father killed, Paul and Jessica are forced to flee into the deep, unforgiving desert, where they finally encounter the native Fremen people. So out there in the scorching sands, Paul realizes he's caught right in the middle of two massive, cynical manipulations. On one hand, he's the Kwisatz Haderach, the genetic result of cold, calculated biology. And on the other, the Fremen view him as the Lisan al-Gaib, their prophesied savior. But here's the really dark truth of it all. This religion was artificially implanted into Fremen culture centuries ago by the Bene Gesserit, purely as a backup plan to manipulate them if needed. Paul's destiny isn't divine. It's a fabricated myth. Literally a lie designed for control. A terrible purpose, the awakening of Muad'Dib. This is where he truly embraces his new life. Accepted by the Fremen, he takes the name Muad'Dib. Now this is where things get really fascinating, because it totally demystifies his powers. Paul's prescience isn't just space magic, right? When he eventually consumes the highly lethal water of life, it unlocks his mind. It combines his mentat computational training with the infinite data of his newly unlocked ancestral memories. The spice essentially removes the constraints of linear time for him, allowing him to compute and actually perceive the entirety of human history and all possible futures simultaneously. It's wild. But here's the catch, and it's a huge one. This supreme vision, it becomes a horrifying prison for him. It doesn't just predict the future, he sees it as a tangible reality. By looking at the paths of the future, he becomes locked into them. He starts to feel this terrible purpose taking over, this suffocating realization that the collective human unconscious is pulling him toward an inevitable bloody holy war. And the crazy part is, every attempt he makes to prevent it only seems to ensure it happens faster. Vengeance and holy war, the price of survival, the point of no return. Driven by the need to destroy House Harkonnen and avenge his murdered father, Paul makes the fateful choice to actively weaponize the Fremen's faith. The sheer transformation he goes through is drastic. We watch him shed his noble idealism for cold, hard vengeance. His trusted mentors replaced by millions of fanatical worshippers. And while his love for the Fremen warrior Chani is incredibly deep, he still makes the totally pragmatic, political choice to marry the Emperor's daughter, Princess Irulan, just to seize the galactic throne. He uses religion, not out of faith, but as a calculated weapon. So the crucial takeaway here is that, sure, he defeats the Emperor and the Harkonnens, but it's a completely hollow victory. He takes the throne, but he is entirely unable to stop the fanatical forces he unleashed. A devastating religious jihad sweeps across the universe in his name, slaughtering billions of people and destroying entire cultures. He ultimately becomes the exact kind of tyrant his father would have absolutely despised. The burden of prescience, the Emperor's trap, moving into the events of Dune Messiah. Paul is now the most powerful emperor in human history, yet he is utterly miserable. He's trapped by his own godhood, surrounded by a vast conspiracy. At this point, basically everyone, the Bene Gesserit, the Spacing Guild, the Tleilaxu, they are all conspiring against him. They launch this brutal attack using an atomic weapon called a stone burner, which actually physically blinds Paul. But Paul completely shocks his enemies. His oracular vision is so absolute, so entirely locked into the timeline he's foreseen, that he continues to rule flawlessly. He just moves through life perfectly synced with his visions, seeing the world without physical eyes. And it all culminates in absolute heartbreak. Despite this godlike vision, he actually fails to foresee the full truth of his future. Chani, the love of his life, dies giving birth to unexpected twins, Leto II and Ghanima. This profound shock finally shatters his inescapable prescient trap. Rendered truly, completely blind for the very first time, he executes an assassin threatening his kids. And then he makes his final choice. He embraces Fremen tradition and wanders alone into the deep desert to die, finally escaping his own unbearable godhood. Beware of heroes, the cautionary tale of Dune, the true meaning of his journey. We really have to separate the myth from the reality here. Paul Atreides is not some magical god who cracks the earth with his voice or makes it rain just by thinking about it. He is a profoundly flawed, incredibly tragic human being. Paul's ultimate fate deliberately strips away all the glamour of the Chosen One archetype. He is the ultimate proof of Frank Herbert's thesis that scores of people die and entire galaxies burn when men become messiahs. So I want to leave you with this final, genuinely haunting question to think about. If you could foresee a future drowning in blood, but it was the absolute only way to avenge your family, what would you choose? It's this impossible moral dilemma that cements Paul Atreides as one of science fiction's most incredibly complex protagonists. His legacy reshapes the galaxy for thousands of years, and it all started from the tragic choices of a boy on a desert planet. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember, keep questioning the heroes you see.